The early morning air was crisp, carrying the sharp scent of pine and the faint resinous tang of spruce trees that surrounded the base station. I stood outside the small weathered building, my breath forming short clouds as I pulled my jacket tighter against the chill. It was the kind of place that felt cut off from the world, remote enough to silence the noise of the nearby towns and highways, yet close enough that the mountains loomed large in the distance, always watching. I was here for the summer, taking a temporary position as a Forest Service researcher. My job was straightforward enough: monitor wildlife patterns, maintain equipment, collect data from remote sensors, and keep track of any unusual activity reported by rangers or hikers. The research was part of a broader ecological study my university was sponsoring, and while the work was demanding, it suited me: quiet, structured, and grounded in facts. It was a welcome break from the noise of city life, and a chance to reconnect with a landscape I'd grown up near but never truly understood. Inside the base, my supervisor, Mark, was already at his desk, going through radio logs. He was a few years older than me, steady and practical, with an easy way of talking that made the long shifts feel less isolating. "Morning," he said without looking up. "Weather looks good for the next few days. Keep an eye on the eastern sensor cluster. There's been some animal movement flagged, probably elk or deer." I nodded, double-checking the maps and reports pinned to the corkboard. The pine and spruce forests here were dense and rugged, with a thick understory that made navigating the backcountry tricky. Trails wound like veins through the trees, but many were little more than animal paths worn thin by seasonal migrations. I liked the challenge, the way the forest seemed to breathe and change with every hour. My days settled into a rhythm: early morning hikes to check sensors, logging data, repairing equipment when necessary, and evening reports radioed back to base. The afternoons were often the quietest, time to review notes, analyze trends, and prepare for the next day's patrols. The forest was full of sounds during these hours: bird calls sharp against the rustle of leaves, the distant crash of a stream tumbling over rocks, the subtle snap of twigs underfoot from small mammals or curious deer. It was easy to lose myself in those details, to forget the outside world existed. Despite the isolation, there was a steady stream of contact. Rangers passed irregularly, some stationed nearby at other posts, others just hiking or checking traps. Conversations were brief and businesslike: weather updates, trail conditions, wildlife sightings, but friendly enough to break the solitude. I learned their names, snippets of their stories, and the slow rhythm of life in the mountains. Most evenings I returned to my small cabin, a modest structure nestled among the pines, its walls lined with worn maps and wildlife photos. The wood stove was the heart of the space, its crackling fire pushing back the cool night air. I cooked simple meals, usually something quick and filling, and spent the rest of the night reading or journaling. The notebook on my desk was half filled with observations, patterns in animal movement, changes in the weather, and notes on equipment status. It felt good to track progress, to measure my small place in this vast landscape. There was comfort in the routine. The isolation was a choice, a way to clear my head and focus on something tangible. I wasn't here chasing myths or legends, and I didn't believe in anything beyond what I could see or measure. That skepticism was part of why I'd taken this job: to be grounded, to remind myself that the world was ruled by natural laws, not shadows or superstition. But even as I told myself that, there was an undeniable weight to the wilderness: the way the forest seemed to hold its breath in the late afternoon, the deep quiet that pressed in as the sun dipped behind the ridges. I chalked it up to the usual solitude of remote work, the kind that made small noises seem louder and the dark stretch further. For now, it was enough. The day started like any other. I spent the morning at the watchtower, checking radio signals, monitoring weather readings, and logging wildlife data. The wind had dropped off overnight, and a soft hush had settled over the trees, quiet, but not quite peaceful. By noon, a light snowfall began. It wasn't the sort that demanded immediate concern, but enough to make me keep an eye on the horizon. The forecasts back at base had warned of heavier conditions rolling in later in the week. I made a note in my log and watched it collect thin layers along the railings outside. Wildlife had grown scarce again. That wasn't unusual in winter, but this felt sharper, more abrupt. Tracks that had been consistent for days now vanished completely. The small game trails I'd been documenting, rabbits, coyotes, even the occasional bear print, were gone, like something had swept clean the snow overnight. It didn't strike me as alarming, just strange. Still, it stayed in the back of my mind. The afternoon passed without incident. I swept the inside of the tower, boiled water for tea, and filled in a few sections of my tracking journal. Around sunset, I bundled up and stepped outside to double-check the solar battery housing. The light had dimmed behind a thick ceiling of gray, and the falling snow had quickened. Cold air moved over the ridge in low, uneven gusts. I didn't stay out long. The radio crackled, breaking the quiet. "Tower 9, this is Field Surveyor Halpern. Do you copy?" I adjusted the volume, recognizing the crackle in his voice. "Copy that, Halpern." A pause. "Have you been outside in the last 10 minutes?" "No." "Why?" Another pause, heavier. "I haven't either." "I'm about a quarter-mile downslope." "Something's off." "Might be interference, but it doesn't feel like it." His signal dropped again, replaced by a warble of static. I waited a few seconds, then stepped out onto the platform, still holding the radio. The wind had picked up, slanting through the trees in irregular gusts. It hadn't started snowing yet, but the pressure had dropped, too fast for comfort. When the radio came alive again, the tone was different. Curtis sounded winded. "There's a marker team up near Copper Ridge." At least there was. "Surveyors logging terrain damage." "They're not checking in." "How far?" 5 clicks northeast of your tower." "You're closest." "I already radioed the base." I hesitated. That stretch of trail wasn't a pleasant one even in full daylight, and the last of that was already gone. But I said I'd go. It wasn't really a choice. I packed fast: map, flashlight, medical kit, snow gear, thermos. The trail was narrow, winding, and steep in places, cutting across boulders still slick from meltwater. The temperature had dropped sharply, and by the time I reached the upper slope near Copper Ridge, the trees had gone still. No wind. No sound. Even the snow underfoot seemed to absorb noise instead of crunching like it should. The ridge had flattened into a half-frozen basin where runoff had carved out a shallow dip between 2 shoulders of pine. The surveyors had marked their path with high-visibility flags, bright orange strips flapping weakly in the breeze. One of them had been torn down and half buried under scattered rock. The actual slide hadn't been large, more of a sudden spill of shale and broken timber, but it had torn through the clearing like a fist. I spotted one of the tripods first, lying twisted against a boulder, its legs crumpled inward like a dead spider. Just past it, I saw the pack, dark gray, half-zipped, and pinned beneath a fallen branch. I moved slowly. The ground was unstable, a crumbling mixture of old stone and wet earth. I scanned for bodies but saw none. Just scattered equipment, a collapsed tent, a clipboard partially buried, a boot tangled in brush, but no blood, no movement. I crouched by the pack and opened it carefully. Waterlogged maps. A GPS locator blinking red. No personal effects, no keys, no ID, no wallet. Whoever had been here left in a hurry or hadn't been the one to leave at all. That's when I looked up, and saw it. Across the basin, at the far edge of the trees, something was standing in the clearing. It wasn't moving. Just watching. Even from that distance, I could tell it wasn't human. The proportions were wrong, too tall, too narrow through the torso, the limbs long in a way that made the shoulders droop low and the head tilt forward like it was hung from a hook. I couldn't see eyes, not really, but I knew it was staring. I could feel it. Its skin, or hide, or whatever it was, looked dark and taut. Not bare, not furred either. Just lean and stretched, like a shape borrowed from something that no longer existed. I didn't move. Not at first. It wasn't doing anything. Just standing there, motionless in the snow, arms low, shoulders slouched. But the longer I stared, the more something crawled up the back of my neck. My mind kept trying to fit it into some category, man, bear, elk maybe, but it didn't hold. It didn't belong to any of those things. It didn't belong to anything I'd ever seen in these woods. And the worst part was that it hadn't made a sound. No snap of branches, no crunch of snow. Like it had always been there. Then its head twitched sideways, just slightly. That broke it for me. I turned, not caring how much noise I made, and started down the trail, slipping once and catching myself on a low branch. My breath came in clouds. I didn't look back. I didn't want to know if it was following. I told myself it wasn't, but I didn't believe that. By the time I reached the tower, my gloves were soaked through, my face raw from the wind. I slammed the door shut behind me and locked it, even though I knew that wouldn't matter if whatever I saw really wanted in. Only then did I notice, snow had started to fall. Thin flakes at first, scattered like ash, but steady. The wind picked up, brushing against the tower windows like something searching for a crack. I stayed up that night, watching the tree line through the narrow pane of glass, waiting for something I couldn't name to step out of the dark again. Even after locking the tower door and checking the windows twice, I couldn't settle. The wind had shifted, colder, sharper. It howled along the steel beams beneath the floor, rattling the support struts like something scraping for a way in. Every sound landed wrong. The groan of timber, the creak of the stairs outside, the whisper of snow against the roof, all of it felt too deliberate. Too close. Something had followed me. I told myself it wasn't possible. That I'd run hard, kept moving through the trees without stopping, but that didn't matter. The feeling didn't leave. It stayed in my spine, in the hollow beneath my ribs, like a splinter I couldn't get out. Every few minutes I moved from window to window, watching the clearing below for any sign. Nothing moved, but that was part of it. The woods didn't breathe. No wind. No sound. Not even the rustle of branches. And then, just past 3 a.m, I heard it. Not a knock, not a voice. Just wait. A shift of pressure along the outer stairs. Slow. Heavy. Something brushing the metal handrail as it climbed halfway, then paused. I stood completely still, one hand on the flashlight, the other gripping the edge of the desk. The heater clicked once behind me, then fell silent again. No further steps. No attempt to open the door. Just a long stretch of stillness. I pressed my ear to the glass, holding my breath. Below, the snow remained undisturbed. But something was there, I could feel it, pressed just out of sight, lingering at the edge of the platform like it wanted me to know it could get this close, and that it did. It didn't stay long. No more than a minute. But when it left, it moved without sound. A vanishing presence, like smoke in the dark. The worst part wasn't the visit. It was the knowing that whatever I'd seen in the clearing now knew exactly where I slept. By the following morning, the whole valley was buried under 6 inches of new powder, and the sky had settled into a dull, unbroken gray, the kind of light that blurred the line between night and day. I kept the heater running and spent most of the morning indoors, checking trail maps and rereading weather bulletins. The forecast had shifted again, now calling for a more severe storm front by the end of the week. I tried Granger twice on the radio. Once at 8, then again around 10. No answer. I wasn't too concerned at first. He'd mentioned rotating back down to the base camp by midweek, and it wasn't unusual for the signal to weaken if he dropped behind the ridgeline. But by noon, the silence started to press in. I logged the failed contact attempts and stepped outside to sweep snow off the panels. The air had gone still, almost oppressively so. No wind. No birdsong. Nothing moved in the woods. I stood there for a while, broom in one hand, eyes scanning the slope below the tower. There were no tracks, no elk, no foxes, not even the crows that usually congregated near the streambed. It was like everything that breathed had decided to leave. Back inside, I thumbed through the older ranger logs that came with the tower. Most were dry, maintenance records, weather notes, animal sightings. But one binder had a different tone to it, handwritten in slanted print with inconsistent spacing. No name on the inside cover. Just the year, 1991. It didn't start like a report. It started like someone trying to remember something they'd already forgotten. Most entries didn't mention dates. Some ended mid-sentence. One page had been torn out entirely. The handwriting grew more erratic the deeper I read. February something. Snow came early this year. I keep seeing tracks outside that don't follow the curve of the slope. Something long. Dragging. Can't tell if it's an animal or not. Heard the wind change again last night. But it wasn't wind. Too steady. Too low. I don't know how to write down the sound. It watches without watching. I don't think it remembers what it is. I paused. Read that line again. The next few pages were different. More visual. Sketches of the surrounding area, ravines, rock shelves, broken trails. And then a rough map, hand-drawn and water-warped, folded twice into the center binding. One spot near the western ridge was marked with a small red X, almost faded to a dull stain. I ran my finger over the page, then set the binder down. By afternoon, the radio was still dead. I tried the main base this time, no reply. Just a slow wash of static and the faint pop of atmospheric interference. I double-checked the wiring inside the tower, ran a signal test, even replaced the backup batteries. Nothing changed. The silence didn't feel technical. It felt intentional. Around dusk, I pulled on my heavier coat and climbed to the upper platform. The clouds had thickened into a low, bruised ceiling. The tree line looked darker than usual, even under the snow. Something about the light, or maybe just my nerves. I kept thinking about the red X. I hadn't noticed it on any of the department maps. I searched again to be sure, flipping through the government-printed charts I brought up with me. It wasn't there. Nothing marked. No trail, no site, no ranger post. I didn't plan to visit it. Not then. But I made a note of the coordinates anyway. Some part of me was already turning it over. That night I barely slept. I left the lantern on, sat by the narrow window overlooking the east slope. The forest below looked still, flat, almost painted. But that wrong kind of stillness, the sort you only notice after staring too long. I dreamed, I think. Hard to say. When I closed my eyes, I saw the clearing from the night before. The toppled gear. The snow packed into strange, heavy prints that veered off into the trees. And farther beyond that, the figure. That same impossible posture. The way it tilted forward like its weight didn't distribute right. In the dream, or whatever it was, the thing was closer. Not just watching, but waiting. It stood in a clearing lit by no sun or moon, just the dim grayness of waking memory. Its limbs hung long and heavy at its sides, not moving, but trembling ever so slightly, as if held back. I couldn't see a face. Only the outline. But it felt uncannily familiar, yet strange enough to twist the center of my chest. I woke with a start, the cot cold under me, the lantern still hissing quietly near the window. Snow had started to collect against the glass. Later that morning, I hiked to the base of the slope and checked the auxiliary signal repeater. The path curved around a series of narrow switchbacks, barely visible beneath the snowdrift. I had to dig the unit out by hand. No visible damage, but no power either. The whole grid must have gone down, maybe somewhere closer to the base. That explained Granger's silence, but it didn't make it feel any better. I stayed out longer than I should have, hoping to catch movement in the woods. A deer, a hare, anything. But there was nothing. The only sound was my own breath in the scarf. The wind didn't pick up again until nightfall. And when it did, it came in low, dragging across the trees like it didn't know how to lift. That evening, I opened the old notebook again. The later pages had changed tone. Less afraid. More resigned. One stuck with me, scribbled between what looked like two incomplete maps. I think it's the silence that opens the way. It moves where things forget they're alive. That line didn't leave me. The final pages were covered in crossed-out text. Just loops of writing, over and over, like the writer had tried to pin down a thought they couldn't hold. One sketch at the very end showed the tower itself, drawn from a distance. The angle was wrong, like it had been observed from high in the trees or across a ravine. There was a figure in the window. Small. Alone. I didn't finish my tea that night. I set the cup down halfway through and listened to the wind. It wasn't what it carried that unsettled me. It was what it seemed to be missing. By the time night settled, the wind had picked up enough to moan through the narrow vents of the tower roof. Snow blew in quick, slanted bursts, blotting out the stars and swallowing the trees one row at a time. I hadn't slept. Not really. Every creak of the platform boards made my muscles tighten, and every gust against the window seemed like it carried something more than just weather. Then came the sound, soft at first, like boots on frozen dirt. I killed the lantern and moved to the corner of the cabin, keeping low. My breath held. The noise didn't come from the steps or the catwalk, it came from below, near the base of the tower. Something moving around the support structure. Something slow. I cracked the window just enough to feel the air cut through. The woods were a smear of black and gray. For a while, nothing moved. Then I caught it, just a sliver of motion in the tree line, passing between two trunks. Tall. Round shape. Arms that hung low and didn't swing when it walked. No light reflected off the skin, but I knew it was watching. The radio was dead. No contact with base. Whatever storm system had moved in must have knocked the signal out. I tried more than once, cycling frequencies, tapping the mic. Nothing but static. I was alone. I didn't wait. I packed quick and quiet, just what I needed, the old ranger's notebook, what was left of my food, flares, and the lantern. I knew the map. I knew where the red X pointed. That ruin, or whatever it was, might be the only shelter left. Descending the tower steps was the worst part. I kept thinking I'd hear a new sound behind me, a crack of movement, a change in the rhythm of the wind. But nothing came. The forest had gone wrong. I couldn't describe it any other way. The snow muffled every footstep, and the pines seemed to lean closer together than they had the day before. It felt like moving through a throat. No sky. No noise. Just the wet crackle of ice forming on my sleeves. Somewhere along the ridge, I heard something snap through the trees, a branch, clean and heavy. I ran. Not long. Just far enough to make myself stop thinking. I ducked under a fallen log, then through a gap between two slick outcroppings, following the trail as it curved back toward the lower basin. I didn't look behind me until I reached the narrow creek near Burned Hollow. That's where I saw it again, just for a moment. Down by the far side of the gully, the beast stepped into view. Not charging. Not hunting. Just moving. Its head brushed the lower branches, and its posture hung crooked, like it had too many joints in the wrong places. The air around it felt wrong, compressed somehow, like it carried silence with it. When it turned toward me, I ran again. That time, it followed. Not close, not crashing through the woods like a bear would, but it moved when I moved. Always behind. Always just past the corner of my vision. By the time I reached the canyon floor near the trail split, I was soaked with sweat and too cold to feel anything past my elbows. The trail toward the old ranger station was barely visible, marked only by rusted nails and split timber, and a sagging line of fencing meant to keep people out. I broke through it, boots crunching through brittle brush. That's when the ground gave way beneath me. I hit hard, lower leg catching between two stones, shoulder scraping a half-rotten log. Snow blew past above me. I'd stumbled into a depression, maybe a pit that had been covered by runoff. Climbing out wasn't easy. My leg throbbed with every step, but it wasn't broken. I limped toward the trees, keeping the ridge wall on my left. That's when I saw the tower again. Not mine, older. Burned out, collapsed on one side. The remains of an emergency shelter no one had spoken about at base. I remembered it from the map. The red X. Smoke still clung faintly to the wood beams, though the fire must have been years ago. Char streaked the roof and the floor sagged in the middle. But it was shelter. It would have to be enough. I moved through the doorway, kicking aside debris and flattening a space to think. That's when I remembered the fuel canister. I'd found it on the second day out here, tucked behind a metal storage bin under my own tower, a leftover from past rangers, probably long forgotten. I hadn't brought it with me, but I had a second can of lighter fluid in my kit. Enough for one trick. I took a flare out and set it beside the can. A real trap wasn't in the cards. But a distraction? That I could manage. I built the pile fast, dry bark, bundled pine cones, old frame boards cracked in half. Anything that would burn hot and fast. I soaked the pile with the fluid and backed away. I didn't have to wait long. It stepped into view from the far slope. Pale in some places, dark in others, like its skin had stretched and thinned over parts of the bone. The beast's posture was low and deliberate now, no longer moving like it didn't care I was watching. Its limbs flexed with each step, joints crooked and backwards, like it was adjusting to the shape of the land. I grabbed the flare gun and fired, straight at it. The flare struck the tree above and burst sideways in a streak of red, missing entirely. The thing didn't even flinch. It paused for a moment, sniffed the air, or maybe listened. Then it pressed forward. Closer now. It passed over the edge of the firelight, and halted just outside range. Its head tilted, not curious, not amused. Just wrong. Like it was registering my presence in a way I couldn't return. That's when I lit the pile. Flame rushed up in a burst, too fast at first, and then the old wood caught, spreading low and wide. The heat pulsed outward in waves, smoke climbing into the gray sky. The creature stopped at the edge of the fire, legs tensed, back arching slightly as the light caught it fully. Its face wasn't a face at all. Just a ridged bone structure beneath leathery skin, with deep-set hollows where eyes might have been. No expression. No recognition. But it stared into the fire like it remembered something older than language. Then it let out a sound, deep, vibrating, like a boulder dragged across stone. I stepped back, hand tightening around the lantern handle. The beast didn't retreat. It stepped laterally instead, circling the flames like it was gauging the edge, testing how far it could go without burning. Smoke blew sideways in a gust, and for a second I lost sight of it, then saw its silhouette on the other side of the fire, angling toward where the wall had collapsed inward. It was trying to cut me off. I grabbed what was left in my bag and bolted. No direction, just away. Snow and ash swirled together in the cold air. I vaulted a half-fallen timber, ducked low beneath blackened beams, and threw myself down the slope behind the old station. My boots slid over ice and mud, catching roots and frozen ruts, but I didn't stop. Behind me, the beast shrieked again, louder this time, closer. The trees thinned near the edge of the ridge, opening into a sheer drop that curved around to the basin below. I didn't risk the exposed path. I veered left, scrambling into denser brush, using every ridge and outcropping to break sight lines. Branches tore at my coat. My breath burned in my chest. I kept going. The noise behind me didn't vanish, but it faded. Distant. Slower. Like the beast had lost track or grown bored. Or maybe it was waiting again, somewhere ahead, just out of sight. I didn't stop to find out. The fire had taken hold of the old ranger's fort, flames licking hungrily at the dry timbers and casting flickering shadows against the snow. I was back inside the tower, the warmth from the small heater a poor defense against the cold biting through the windows. My breath fogged the glass, and outside the storm had thickened, snow falling hard and fast, whipped by a biting wind. I keyed the radio again, voice tighter than before. Requesting emergency evacuation. Old forts caught fire and conditions are worsening. I hesitated before adding, biting back the words I wanted to say, there's something here. Instead, I swallowed it down, forcing the calm the radio demanded. Static hissed in response. No answer. The minutes dragged as I tried again, desperation creeping into my voice. Base, this is Tower 9. Please respond. Emergency evac needed. Fires spreading. Nothing but crackling silence. Outside, the wind had picked up, dragging the snow against the windows like it was trying to pry them open. The storm was closing in faster than I expected. My limbs felt heavy, numb from cold and adrenaline. The isolation pressed in, thick and unyielding, and I knew whatever had come for me wasn't far behind. I moved to the window and peered out into the dark, the orange glow of the fire pulsing like a heartbeat through the falling snow. The trees around the fort were caught in the glow, shadows bending and twisting with the flames. Somewhere beyond the light, the quiet menace waited, patient and unyielding. I pulled my coat tighter, feeling the weight of the night settle over me. This place, the watchtower, the forest, the storm, none of it felt like home anymore. Not with what I'd seen, what I'd faced. But there was no turning back. No safety to be found but forward. The radio crackled again, faint but clear. Tower 9, this is base. We copy. Evac team en route. Hold tight. Relief washed over me, fragile and fleeting. The storm wouldn't wait, and neither would the darkness. 30 minutes. An eternity in this storm, with that thing waiting in the dark. I dropped the mic and pressed my forehead against the cold window pane, fogging the glass. The ancient pine and fir trees stood jagged and dark against the snow, their silhouettes bent and bowed by the wind. The storm had shredded the stillness, scattering the snow in frantic waves, as if the forest itself was restless. My eyes drifted to the old ranger's notebook lying open on the table. The pages were yellowed and brittle, filled with cryptic notes, warnings about the creature that haunted these mountains. The passages rambled between clarity and madness, describing a darkness older than the trees, born from hunger and shadow. I thought about the map, the red X marking a spot deep in the wilderness, a place I'd fled to but barely understood. Beneath the notebook was the photo I'd been too afraid to look at again, my parents, frozen in a frame cracked along the edges, their smiles sharp in the harsh light of memory. I hadn't pulled it from my pack since the nightmare began. Now, with the weight of what had pressed against my door, and the knowledge of what stalked these hills, that image felt like a fragile tether to a life I might never return to. Outside, the wind flared suddenly, rattling the windows like something desperate to get inside. I tightened my jacket around me and stepped cautiously onto the platform, breath fogging in the frozen air. My gaze swept the shadowed tree line, searching for movement, any sign that the dark thing had returned. The snow muffled sound, but I could feel the forest holding its breath, waiting. Minutes passed like hours. Then headlights pierced the white curtain, slicing through the storm like a promise, a rescue vehicle cutting a slow, steady path toward the tower. The bright beams pulled against the snowdrifts, glowing soft and warm. I called out, voice hoarse and breaking, moving toward the approaching lights. Relief was slow in coming, but it arrived in the form of figures bundled against the cold, voices warm over the radio. Their presence felt like a fragile lifeline, pulling me back from the edge of whatever nightmare had swallowed me whole. They helped me down the steep, slippery path away from the tower. My legs were numb and stiff, but adrenaline pushed me forward. I looked back once, toward the dark, tangled forest. It stood silent, but it wasn't empty. The trees seemed to lean in, watching, waiting. The mark the beast had left wasn't just in the physical scars or the burning remnants of the fire lines. It was something deeper. Even as the rescue vehicle drove me toward warmth and safety, a cold certainty settled deep in my chest. This was not the end. The darkness that had followed me was patient. Hungry. It had stretched across decades, carving a place in these mountains, waiting for moments like this, when the world slipped quiet and the walls between this life and something older grew thin. I wasn't safe, not really. Not yet. Because out there, beyond the reach of light and radio, something waited. Watching. Still. And it wasn't finished.